Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Do World Podcast. I am Barney, and I am here with my two co-hosts, and number one of them is...
Hi, good morning. My name is Ken.
And our other co-host today is...
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jacob.
All right, and it's a lot of fun to have the three of us back together, and especially to see that Ken is outside. The weather is great for being out and enjoying the mornings there, as we're at the end of May. And our topic today is going to be about school. And I think probably we've noticed, I might have said before that the Japanese school year is kind of all year long. It goes from April and until March. So as a teacher here in Japan, we're still kind of getting things felt out. We're still kind of getting the kids, adjusted to school and getting into the rhythm. We're just about 6 weeks into the school year or so. But in my case, I only teach the kids about once a week or so. So it goes a little bit slower, but you can see improvements. But it's always funny how the fact that it's year long, that, you see, one grade of kids in March, like the youngest grade, and then you get ready to teach that same youngest grade, new kids in April, and you're thinking, why are they so unruly now? These kids, when I used to come to this classroom, these kids were great, and now they're just so fresh, just a few weeks later. So here we're getting used to school starting, but around a lot of elsewhere in the world, especially in North America, school is ending or has already ended for some people. So it would be fun to talk about those two different perspectives of the school year, and especially to hear some insight from Ken, as he used to teach for a number of years as well. So let's get the show started today.
Barney, I'm curious, maybe for our viewers, what you teach and how the ages fluctuate. I- It's just it's foreign to me. Ha ha.
Well, it just so happens that I teach English as a foreign language. And I have taught a number of different ages, and up until very, very recently, I even taught adults. But the main area, the main age group that I teach are as early as 2 into elementary aged students. And then so as I was, my little illustration at the beginning of today, yeah, like the 2-year-old, 2 and 3-year-old class, and then 3 and 4-year-old class. Because 2 and 3-year-old is not, I guess you wouldn't say mandatory, but I guess that's optional for parents who want their kids to either want their kids to get a head start or just want their kids out of the house. I'm not sure, but for kindergartens, then yeah, for sure, kids, like probably 95% of students will start in the 3 to 4-year-old class, and then yeah, they still miss their parents a lot those first few weeks, and I think I'm glad to be here and glad to know you guys, but unlike the main teachers, I leave after 20 minutes, but these main teachers are there from 9:30 until 2, and they have a lot of work that they have to do.
I imagine they do a lot of parenting.
Yeah.
What are your class sizes like? How many kids come in?
Yeah, I think that ideally the schools like to have, I think the younger classes, they keep them a little bit smaller, so 20 to 25, sometimes a little bit less. And then the oldest class, because kindergarten goes for 3 years, so then the 5 and 6-year-old class could be 30 to 35 kids. But yeah, like I think for us especially, we see just what the decline in population rate is doing. I think I saw a few weeks ago that For 45 years in a row, the birth rate has been declining in Japan. And so now you can really see it because there there are cases where there's like maybe just one too many kindergartens in these areas, and so it's hard. It's stretching the available population enough that class sizes are down and down, and so now you'll have like 15 to 18 kids in the younger classes.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Barney, do you have a sense, having lived in Japan as long as you have, for why the calendar is flipped compared to ours here in the US? Like, which kind of logical framework created that system where you start this time of year? And then why I mean, do you have a guess of why we end this time of year? I have no clue. I'm just curious if you've thought of that before.
Yeah, I think for here, I know that the school year coincides with the fiscal year, so I wonder if that's how it started, and then it would be kind of a which came first kind of thing. But yeah, the fiscal year, everyone starts their new jobs in April too. So when you're on the train, you see all these new recruits, in their suits, getting ready for their first days of work, and you think, oh, good luck out there, go get them. Everyone's starting off fresh together in April. And then there's a lot of songs about like the start of the school year in April, and then, the cherry blossoms and whatnot. And, but it was interesting because when COVID started, it was affecting really most prevalent here from end of February and then start of March. And then so it threw off a lot of people didn't have graduation because of that. My sister-in-law was a sixth grade teacher at that time, and her class had just been out of school for a week because so many people had the flu, which actually may have been COVID at that time. And then they had to close school for the rest of the school year. So they didn't see each other for a really long time. And then they just went to their junior high schools from May or June-ish then of that year instead of April. But then I've always read, and then we just have like 6 weeks of summer vacation. But I've read and studied that in the US that I guess so many kids were needed home to farm, to help farm in the summer, that's why the
Ah,
summer vacation was so long. But why it has stayed that way, I guess maybe tradition, I'm not sure, but it would be interesting to hear other people who have looked into that more as to why that is. But we in the very one episode that I did with Jill Eileen Smith, my co-host that day was Jason, and then he's in Indianapolis. His kids, they have been done with school for a while because they start school there the first week of August.
oh,
So yeah, their year is really early, but then they get out a bit earlier than usual too. But there, it seems like some changes are being made. But
interesting.
mhm.
Yeah, I've always, you know, I've worked 30 years in education, and I always thought about the logic behind it's not ever 3 months off, but having that big chunk off.
Mhm.
And from an employment standpoint of the high school kids, I got all that, and, you know, Jacob's daughter, Aubrey, wouldn't have been able to probably work as much as she did at Hartzler's Ice Cream, but still to just take and brain dead for for those 2.5 months is just it was always kind of beyond me, and, you know, I applaud what happens where you live in Japan.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I would be interested to see what would happen in that case. And I noticed that even after 6 weeks, I always think, oh, the kids are going to be rusty, but they pick back up really quickly once we get back into English classes again in September, uh, the middle of July. And then I thought, wow, what would it be like if there were, 12 weeks or whatever it is, 10 weeks or however long it is of vacation? That might be tricky. And,
Yeah.
and now I just realized I never finished my thought. During COVID, then there started to be a push to, should we line up Japan's school year with the with most of the rest of the world and start from September from now on in 2020. And a lot of people thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, some kids go overseas and then for school, but what grade are they in? It's hard to figure that out because the school year is different. But I think that in the end, kind of the traditional thinking won out, and probably there were a lot of logistics because the one school I was teaching at the time, the university, they thought, well, if this does happen, then everything you've taught, online now from May to June or July or whatever, you'll just have to start over again and start the new year fresh again from September if that did happen. So it it may happen, it may never happen that Japan switches to a similar schedule as other schools around the world.
Hmm. It's interesting to think about the concept of rest or refreshment or Sabbath lined up with the concept of efficiency and, like, I don't know, the tension between, because a lot of times if you talk with students, at least I used to be this way, and I don't know, I would assume there's a big chunk of students that feel this way, that they love that large summer break. It feels refreshing for them. They, on a personal level, like, they just love that freedom and the chance to play and have less structure. But there's a cost in terms of their academic efficiency or performance, probably. But there are also benefits, and it's kind of interesting to think about the tension between those two. Like, when you create that type of space for play and fun and restoration, and it can give students a renewed energy when they go back in the fall. But then I guess it also depends on how they use the time in the summer. And some students probably don't like that it's so long, but some love that it's so long. So you have different personality types. But I guess I kind of wonder what you both think about that idea of a summer break as a time to get refreshed, and how that relates to the goal of the education is to prepare these students for life. Like, is that break, you know, harming that, or does it actually help it in some ways in terms of giving the students knowledge about how to have hobbies and, use their free time and get refreshed? I don't know. I'm just curious what you guys think of that.
Well, Jacob, I think you make a very valid point because what you've made me remember is how tense, and it's even, I've been out a while now, how tense things are in March and April and May in schools. Generally, there's more fights, there's more, misbehaving, particular to certain age groups. And the break definitely, I think, helps that as far as the refreshing of attitude as well, because you don't hear a lot of things happening terrible in schools in August and September and October. Plus, you have holidays that are happy times as well. So, yeah, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I think I wonder if the longer break is more beneficial for the younger grades, and then if possible, if they wouldn't revolt too much, if it would be possible to change that schedule around for the older grades, as you mentioned, Jacob, for them to get ready, for getting into the real world. So I, how many wonderful memories do I have as a kid, playing outside all those wonderful summer months, playing late at night, eating supper and going out to play again, and watching the fireflies and catching the fireflies and helping my dad in the garden, and, just the wonderful, beautiful smells and memories of summertime and whatnot. So, what a great benefit. And like you say, a refreshing time for kids, especially as they're just getting used to the idea of school and what it means, and how many more years they have left of it. But then, yeah, I wonder if it would make sense to, sorry, but, come up with a different schedule for high school kids. Maybe something similar instead of, 10, 12 weeks to make it 6 weeks, but then give them like a longer spring break or something like that. So that if they did have jobs or, longer breaks here and there so that they could still have chunks of time where they could dedicate to their school, but still have the same amount of break time just at different times throughout the year. But
No, I think it probably could be done. I mean, selfishly, I certainly, when my daughter was from age 0 to, 12, I got to be home at least a month, month and a half, depending if I was coaching and all those kinds of things. But and as far as not having to pay for childcare during, those periods of time as well was certainly an advantage. But being older, certainly, they could have some adaptability to a different kind of schedule. Hmm.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think I also find it fascinating that a lot of our colleges and universities adopt this summer break pattern as well, but
Yeah.
they wouldn't have to. I guess they're probably taking their cues from the what students are used to from their experience going through high school. But it is an interesting thought. I mean, in a lot of ways, in the working world, people don't get chunks of time off. But interestingly, if you're in the field of education, if you're teaching or at high school or college or other grade level, like you would get the summer break often, but some jobs have provisions for sabbaticals. I'm enjoying that now. That's a special thing every so often, but a lot of career paths don't offer that. So I guess I could, in my mind, I could hear some people saying, well, students are going to work their whole lives. Like, should we give them space to enjoy that while they can? Like as a privilege as a grown up to have that time. But then I could hear other voices saying, well, you got to get them used to what they'll be facing, sooner so that they're ready for it. I guess it's like a philosophical question. Like for me, I don't know why just tend to think it's nice to protect for students like their childhood as long as possible that they can have to not feel rushed into adulthood. But I know that as in those teenage years, you are emerging into adulthood. So I see what you're saying, Barney, about that. It could be an interesting model to tighten that up for high school. But what do you guys think in terms of that argument of like protecting kids' childhood because they'll work most of their life, most likely without that type of break? What are your thoughts?
Well, it certainly gave me cause to wonder in a number of ways, Jacob. I watched a lot of kids from families of obsessed with athletics. When I was a kid, Little League was over by mid-July, and that was that, and it was a fun time, and now, the sports can just overtake. We have the summer season, and then we have the fall traveling teams, and those are the things that really make me think, is the time of youth best served that way? Yeah, that's a tough one. Again, as you said, it's philosophical, and, is there great harm being done? I don't know. Do we ask the kids if they really love it?
yeah, it would be interesting to also look at like instances of, kids getting into trouble. How is there change at times when in different school systems that maybe have a shorter summer break, but have different breaks, throughout the year compared with, older kids who are, have the 2.5 months or whatnot off. I don't know, but yeah, I think that it it does. I can see. Sometimes I would think, well, what's 4 years, of changing their summer break, if it were to be like in college, or something like that. But then you think, well, those 4 years are, kind of the last 4 years you have before you do enter the workforce. And the most you can hope for now is 2 weeks, of your own personal paid time off, if that much sometimes. So, I think that probably a lot of people would probably say that some of their best memories were made during those summer vacations, their summer breaks at, high school and college and, beyond then. And yeah, and I guess that having that long time, depending on what kids' parents or the people taking care of them, how their schedules go, it lends more flexibility for planning summer vacations. I guess you could think that if summer break is shorter, then wow, try getting on a flight to Orlando, right? In that time, because it would just be everyone would be everywhere at the same time then, and it would be really hard to spread things out. But as long as you shift the divide the breakup throughout the school year, then who knows? Maybe Disneyland in November is pretty good. I don't know, but but yeah, it's fun to think about this since it is philosophical, but it's hard to think of how it could be because we're also used to how it is at the time.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about how things could be different, but then to recognize how change is so hard and it's would be very difficult for any society to have such a major shift without some compelling reason, just with our traditions the way that they are, it would be very hard. Like we're still having debates at times about daylight savings time, and
Yeah,
there have been discussions, about this congressional action or that congressional action and should we keep observing it? And so if we can't even agree on you know, a a a time change of 1 hour, how are we gonna shift the school year, So, but, it's if there were compelling enough of a reason, I'm sure our society could come up with it. But I had heard, I mean, this is a little bit off the subject, but it's kind of related. It's about cultural change. But I had heard that at one point there was some discussion, and I don't know if this rings true to you, Barney, but something about simplifying the Japanese writing system. I'd heard that there was some, I forget which politician years ago was looking at some options, but there was such a preference to keep with the tradition of having the 3 different, you know, writing systems integrated instead of trying to simplify anything. And so I wonder how, that's with language, but like I know in like mainland China, they simplified Chinese characters. I mean, I wonder how hard that was to pull off. Like it, just thinking about our U.S. system, various changes could be tricky. But maybe if you guys could talk a little bit about on a smaller scale, like when change was introduced into your environments when you were teaching, how did people respond and how nimble were the schools and the administrative structures to change? Like, is that an okay question to ask?
yeah. I think maybe I can go first because the most immediate thing that comes to my mind was going to online classes. That was such a big change, but I I loved that. Boy, that was my niche for sure. Ooh, I was very adept at using Zoom and, breakout, what was it? Breakout rooms or whatever. And, oh boy, before class started, I had the meeting up and was playing, music at the background for students to come with and come into. And, we figured out a lot of the little things you could lock down and to make it so that it was harder for students to not pay attention. And we had a good system of rules about cameras on and whatnot. But I was very, very, very good. I really, really enjoyed teaching online. But I was in the minority. A lot of s- teachers, because this was for everyone, not just language teachers. So a lot of the medical content teachers, they really, really, really did not like it and were really adverse to it. But in my case, my co-teacher and I, we loved it, and we found that it offered us a lot more options than what we had in the past. There were a lot of things that we missed, like, we had a lot of really fun games that we used in class, like, especially since it was a language class, I did one with often misheard lyrics from songs, but we did it like a telephone. So I would show it to one person, then they had to whisper it around, a table of like 6 people, and then the 6th person at each different table wrote what they heard on the whiteboard. And then so we ended up with like 6 or 7 different answers. They were hilarious. And then I would play the actual song for them. So that was great. Like those kind of things we couldn't do anymore. But when we assigned them project-based learning to do and, either real mini sessions and then presenting it for themselves, like sharing the screen and presenting it that way, that was great. A lot of people could really get a lot more out of it than the way that we had been doing it. And it was a lot more efficient for them, I think. But you everyone had to relearn how to teach or, adjust their style. And for me, it was just really felt really natural to do it in this way. But I understand and know and recognize that other people really had trouble with it. One thing that really was tricky is when the university made students come back to campus, but gave some students the option to stay home. So then we were trying to teach everyone in person, but sitting far apart, and a handful of people on the computer at the same time. That was very, very hard. And then I felt that the quality went down for everyone. But there was nothing that we could do about that one. But so that was the biggest change that I can think of that I had to deal with. The other things were probably like just little adjustments to curriculum styles or whatnot here and there, and that's always fun for me. Fine for me. I'm always really happy to try new things because I think we all need to have fresh outlooks, to get things changed up every once in a while, and it's usually for the benefit for all of us. Or we can take what we like and add it to what we have, and what we don't like, just leave it behind. But that's what came to my mind. But how about for you, Ken? You probably experienced a lot of different changes in your long career too, I think.
Sure, sure. I'll start with a silly one just because it popped into my mind. I Barney, first of all, I appreciate the fact that you said you like change. I don't think that's the general ongoing feeling, at least in the faculties I have been part of, and myself included. I'm sure there were times when it was like, you know. But anyhow, I remember chalk dust was a terrible thing. Okay. This one other math teacher says, I went to this surplus place down in Akron and I found one of these. And he found a dry erase, not a board. I mean, it was just a piece of dry erase that was fairly large. And he said, there's a couple more if you want to run down and get one. And so I ran down and got one. And we both brought these into the school and just set them in the chalk tray. And I think there were a lot of people looking at that going, why on earth would you do this? And of course it became a thing. And the fun part for me is they just tore down the middle school I worked at a number of years, and some of my former students took video of a room I was in a lot, and the same dry erase board was sitting in that chalk tray. They didn't bother buying and mounting a new one because, they last forever as long as you don't, clean them with the wrong thing. But, I just couldn't understand the resistance. We can do colors and we can do which then, smart boards came about and those wonderful tools as well. On a more substantial note, time that periods run, is always an ongoing argument. And at one point, we did go from like 42 minutes to 60 minutes and less periods in a day. Now, personally, I love the 60 minutes. 42 was a struggle just to get through the material, and if kids genuinely needed help, and you just send them away with homework. The 60-minute periods I liked because even though I tried not to do more than one concept a day, understanding, where they're sitting, there was time to start homework, and I could at least get them on task for that last 10 minutes or whatever and get around and take a look at that. So, but that was probably it's probably still debated, and I don't know where the school system is on that, where I used to teach. The final thing real quick is we evolved into teaching teams based upon a school in Medina that we went and looked at, and, I thought this was a wonderful thing. In the end, there were problems with that as well, which I won't get into at this point, but, a team of you have a language arts person, you have a special education person, you have your social studies, your English so and you got to meet 1 period a day as a group, and the benefits there to me were just wonderful because sometimes you could have a parent come in that could make it during the day, and they got to visit with all of us, so thought that was a good thing. Again, not everybody thought it was a good thing because, they had their own thing going and in place and were a little bit resistant to the cooperative the cooperative way to conduct business in the school. Good question, Jacob. That's
Mhm.
made us both think, I think.
Thank you. Well, as you're talking there about the dynamics of a team and just made me wonder a little bit about like the student experience, when you like a 60-minute session versus a 40-minute, like from a student's perspective, an additional 20 minutes, that would be great to have help with the homework, like to get it started. Like you said, I wonder, what the average attention span is for an adolescent or a student today. And I wonder too about like sitting in one place. Just different limitations or factors about like length of time, like sitting and for an hour versus 40 minutes. But then you have to weigh these positives and negatives about different models. But I also kind of wonder too, getting back to the broader topic of school years starting and ending, like what a student's experience is in a linear way as they work through the year. Like, do they feel like they're progressing and building? Does it feel like they're hanging on for dear life? And by the end, they're just coming up for air and then summer break happens or do they kind of live break to break? Like, oh, I can't wait till winter break comes, and then they catch their breath and I guess I just kind of wonder as you think about students you've taught or think about your own experience, are there some trends that you've noticed about student experiences? Like, do you hear a lot of feedback from students like, "I can't wait if I can just make it to this break," or do you feel like more students are in the framework of, "Oh, I'm getting better. I feel more confident. I just keep progressing and I don't know, or maybe it's both." I love to just hear your thoughts about that.
Well, for me, math always seemed to be a love-hate sort of concept. Not too many people in between that would say, "Well, I kinda like it." You know, the so I think there were a number of folks that were living from break to break, and of course, the inevitable question that would come up, now and then is, "When am I ever gonna use this?" You know, "Sine and a cosine, let's think about this, shall we?" And it's a tough one because I know in my mind what I wanna say, and it's developing your brain to consider step-by-step processes, and that's gonna sound like ba 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 bum. It sounds like something a teacher has to say.
Like the Charlie Brown teacher, "Wah, wah, wah,
Wah,
wah,
wah,
wah."
wah. Yeah. I'm sure I sounded like that. a lot of the time to some of those ears because, they're just not into math. Uh, oh, um, Barney, how's it feel to you? I saw you reacting.
Yeah, I wonder. I think in my case, I really noticed that the students are really steadily progressing, and I think that in my case, it's a language that I don't think it's just me. It's just I don't think it's just the way that I've developed, thought out and planned out how I teach everything, but I have really spent a lot of time thinking what is the best progression? How is the best way to start, these kids based on their age group to like what are the best phrases to teach them? What are the best questions? What are the best flashcards or the best this or that? And even this year I switched things up. I really sat down and thought about it for a long, long time and thought, wow, you know, what I'm doing this year really seems to make the most sense. But maybe because of just that they're just kids and they're just good at learning, or just the classes are fun, or maybe I've planned them out the right way, or maybe everything. But yeah, they really advance steadily. And then when we get to February and March, I'm like, whoa, yeah, wow, they can handle a lot, and they're more than ready for the next grade level. They'll do just fine. And it's so neat. It's so neat to see that. And I I know that they get in the fall term, they get pretty busy with their sports festivals and their pageants and shows and whatnot that they have to do, and that takes away from them a bit. But they steadily progress, and like I said, between summer break in September or winter break in January, they just pick up right where they were, and it's it's neat to see that. But when I was teaching older students, college age students, I guess that I think with them, they would have to, I think for their own sakes, because, they were there to be doctors, in their second term, they really had to focus a lot more of their attention on their medical content subjects. So I think that they came to class, but they didn't. It was harder for them to stay engaged, probably because they were thinking about so many other things and had so many tests. And then I think that maybe there was probably that they were just hoping to get through English, when the final, we gave them a TOEFL test, which we did the version that tests listening and reading. So we gave them one in April and then another one in January at the end of the English term. And I think that once they probably thought once they've made it past TOEFL, then they can just forget about English for a while. And then, yeah, around the second year between the first year and the second year, we did notice a big drop off, but it's understandable because they're there to learn medicine more than learning English. But with the young kids, it's really amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Jacob, if I could reference something you had said earlier about like the 60-minute classes, math being a dry subject and now 60 minutes of people sitting, I had to get people up and out of their seats. You couldn't realistically have expectations of they're going to just sit quietly and I'm going to rule over this. So there
That's
had
a
to be
good
a lot of
point.
group work or just let's just stand up and walk around and talk to somebody. We can take 5 minutes for that. Yeah, you gotta.
That's a good point.
You are an
Yeah,
entertainer. In a middle school. I mean, there's an entertainment facet to all this. You're doing 5 shows a day, and there's got to be something there for them that. Yeah,
I'll be here all week.
I'll be here all week. Yeah, and you've got good seats. Granted.
Yeah. But I'm thinking since today is kind of focused or thinking a little bit about the end of the school year, how how were your kids, especially Ken? I guess since you were in junior high, we can't really say senioritis, but what was it, eighth or ninth grade or seventh grade itis? How was that? When did you see it like start to pop up a little bit here and there? Well, the kids are really looking forward to summer vacation, and then how was it? As just the floodgates open and we get into May and June and then trying to get through the last bit of classes that you had. And then did you put this notion into your school year planning so that you kept your content a little bit lighter at the end of the year?
Wow. Lots of good questions there. Generally speaking, Barney and Jacob, the school system I was in for many years, the kids were pretty darn good about maintaining some decorum of academia almost right to the end. I give them a lot of credit. Still, when we were doing teams and such, we found a way to get outside and let that energy flow a bit. I did ease up near the very end topic-wise. It isn't, you're not gonna bring in a bunch of math movies, but there were the fare was lighter certainly, and, maybe this is a fun time to say, this not so stylish shirt I have, there's a reason for wearing it. When I started teaching in the late '70s, I mean, this was part of my wardrobe, okay, the big collar and all that. I mean, it was a shirt I wore, and when I moved up here from the Cincinnati area and started teaching in Medina County, for whatever reason, I think I accidentally wore it the last day of school a couple of years in a row, and, kids are very observant, they'll say, "You wore that shirt last year on the last day of school," okay. I started wearing it every single last day of school. I wish I had taken pictures with me in it and had people take pictures. But one thing I know is there's a lot of kids at home that brought their camera the last day of school, and they've got pictures of, this, and it would just be so much fun to look at those pictures through. I was there 27 years, just yeah. I didn't wear it forever the last day, but it was just kind of a fun thing at the end of school. I always gave a survey, like, the last day is totally worthless, of course, it's maybe 25 minutes and, you walk them out to the bus, but I always gave a little survey, and I gave them a chance to say anonymously what they liked about class, what I could have done better for them, ask me a question if you like, so, I thought that was important. I guess it came from being an undergraduate at college where certain professors would do something similarly, and I always appreciated the fact that I could give some input, so I thought it was important for them as well.
And speaking of photos, I know before we started recording this episode, you shared a photo with me. Is this an okay time for you to talk about that, or do you wanna hold it for
Yeah,
later?
no, it was a last day thing.
Okay, let me go ahead and share the screen that with the photo that you
Sure.
sent to me. So, and
Yeah,
hopefully
what you're gonna see is the last day of my student teaching through Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. I was in a school, a city school near Cincinnati called, it's an odd name, Mount Healthy City Schools, and I was teaching high school there, and, as I said to Jacob before we started, I was only 21 years old at this point, and, some of the people I had in class were almost as old as I was,
Oh,
a and this could have been a really tough experience. I didn't grow up a, quote, "city kid," but these guys were very good to me and, you know, just in a joking kind of way that the guy on my right in the black leather jacket, his name's Calvin, he said, "Hey, let's get a picture, Mr. Names, with the brothers." And, we all laughed, but I was really flattered that they would want to do that. And so this was the last day, and you can see the '70s garb in many ways here, although I probably still have that tie. Um, it
And
was it, it
shout
was
out to our
overall a good
episode on
experience.
ties too. We did an episode on
Yes.
ties.
Yeah, the
Yes.
episode on
Yes.
ties.
Yes.
What a great
Yes.
thing. Yes. Um, I ended up teaching in the Mount Healthy school system. I got a job there. I was teaching, I think, 8th grade the first year, and then there was a ninth grade building, so I moved up to that one maybe my 3rd year in the system, and then I moved up to Northeastern, North Central Ohio. But it was a good experience student teaching. I had no horror stories, and
Mm,
yay for the kids who were very, very kind to me.
mhm, mm. Yeah, it's so neat in that picture how everyone's really smiling and looks like they probably made you really feel welcome even as just student teacher. They probably really enjoyed that you were there. It looked like you probably even then, you probably did you have the feeling that, "Yeah, this really is for me, this really is what I want to do?" Did you have that real sense after that experience?
Absolutely, Barney. I'm sure I was taken advantage of 10 different ways because you can be oblivious and naive to certain things that you're not doing well, but yes, it convinced me this was it because, I originally was an accounting major as an undergraduate, and it felt I went to counseling, and it just didn't feel right at all, and through some effective counseling on campus and then student teaching made me think, "Yes, this
Mm,
this is a thing I can do."
mhm, mhm,
Thanks for asking.
mhm.
Barney, how about end of the year as such in your experience?
Yeah, I have a photo, the graduation from the medical school since it's let's see, it's 6 years, a 6-year program, and let me see if I can make it full screen. I wish this is a whole different story, but I am a person who has spent most of my life trying to find the perfect browser ever since Netscape has gone away. And so I'm using a different browser from what I usually use. Zen browser, by the way. But I'm having trouble finding how to share screens full size here. So I think I've got it here. If I could just get to Zoom so I can share the screen here. But I'm pretty happy with Zen in case anyone else wants to look at it. But if they could just bring that Netscape back, boy, that was the best one. So
Wow.
yeah, so this was the very first graduating class, and you'll see that there are a handful of students here from Vietnam and Myanmar and Cambodia and Malaysia even, but a majority of them, of course, are from Japan. And so the women are wearing traditional graduation kimonos that they will have the long sleeves, and then they'll have the skirt in front is like a riding skirt, like for riding a horse. It's called a hakama, and then that's real traditional. And then the guys are just wearing suits. Maybe one or two guys who wore a kimono, I'm not sure. But and then there's the one student in the middle. She has an American dad, and then so she wore like a traditional graduation, cap and gown and mortarboard, which is very unusual in Japan. And then there's some professors in there, but boy, they worked real hard and they made it through those 6 years, and we were real proud of them. And then I'm gonna exit the screen share here so that I can find a picture of my son graduating, of Yuma graduating from kindergarten a few years ago, and you'll get to see how he looked here. If I can, just gonna, I know I'm real close, but kindergarten also is 3 years, as I said, and then they have a nice little ceremony at the end of the year, and the kids have their own uniforms that they wear, and they even receive a little diploma, and that I'll just instead of trying to pick the very best one, I'll just share a few here. So we had a time where, you can meet up with the his teacher that year, and you'll see she's also wearing the graduation kimono, and and then he's wearing, I think it said to slideshow, sorry. He's wearing the uniform, which is shorts and then a little blazer and then a cap, and he has a little graduation flower ribbon on there that says, that this is his graduation, and then the name of his school on the cap. And that he was very, very pleased, and his teacher really liked him that year. And then you can kind of see in the background, there's the teacher of the other classroom, and you can see the way that the hakama fits, and it fits kind of over the kimono, and there's still a little bit of an empty space there for the pocket. And then if I can find a picture of him getting his diploma, then it'll kind of give you a sense of like the ceremony itself. And everyone's very serious, and they practice for quite a while, quite a few weeks beforehand. They practice what they'll do. Let's see, I found a good spot here. They practice how they'll have to wait their turn, and then stand on stage as they're getting ready for their name to be called. And they some schools are a little bit different in different ways, but it's always really nice that these these kids for 3 years, they worked so hard and, you know, made it through kindergarten. But it's I wonder how it is. I think that when I was growing up, there was always kind of jokes, "Oh, now we have 6th grade graduation. Now we have kindergarten graduation." But, because when I was growing up, it was just high school graduation. That was it, high school and college, and then graduation from everything else started. But it's neat to see that, it is neat to honor kids in that way. And so far, I've only experienced graduation from kindergarten, but I think both of you have gone through graduation, your kids graduating at each level. I'm curious how that has felt throughout the years for both of your perspectives.
Very immediate for you, Jacob. And how
Yes.
do you as a parent, sort of removed, although you participate in a lot of school things, how does it feel? What kind of feeling do you get from your 2 girls and your and Micah as the end of the year got nearer?
That's such a great question, Ken. It's been really interesting having 3 children, and there's a larger age gap between our youngest and our older 2. And so it's been really interesting to think about, like, the launching off of the first 2 really with our 2nd child graduating from high school this year. Our son is in college, finished his sophomore year, and then our youngest has 8 years to go. So it's it's been really rich and exciting to see our middle child, Aubrey, kind of getting into this new posture of going to college and launching out and doing something exciting, and to realize, oh wow, we have 8 more years for our youngest to kind of get to that
Mm,
place. Right now, she's much more focused on, you know, like we talked earlier about the summer break and playing and going outside, and that's appropriate because that's what you do at that phase of childhood. But for our older 2, they want to start building and discovering and what could be their career. And so to have the 2 tracks right now, the childhood
mm,
track of our youngest, and then the kind of collegiate career track of the oldest 2. And I do have a few pictures to share here, if I
mhm,
may. And you know, it's interesting thinking about graduations. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I just thought I'd throw this one in. This picture it'll slowly be coming up here for you both, but this is actually from my own graduation from high school. I don't know if you can guess which one is me.
Oh,
But the
easily,
third one from
easily.
the left here in the front row. But yeah, this was with a group from our
Oh, yeah.
track team. But anyway, I remember my own thoughts when I was launching out and getting ready for college and the excitement I had, and also being ready and done with that high school phase and being like, okay, finally now this next phase. Although I really loved high school a lot, but then making that switch to my own kids and how they would feel and starting when you're in the role of a parent and you're trying to like
Mhm.
think, okay, my experience is so different from my child's, but there are some common threads. Like, I wonder what they're feeling right now. Do they feel like I felt, so many years ago? I bet there's some version of that. And so this
Mm.
is our son Mike at his graduation, and I'm there with Katie and Aubrey, and I just love this photo because
Yeah.
we're actually looking at another person who's taking a picture,
Right.
but somebody got it from the side. It's just kind of
Mm.
a really a special
So
moment. But with Micah being our first, it was so neat to witness that for the first time, that kind of sense of completion, and I think he really just grew so much through high school, and it felt like a capstone like moment where
mm,
there was this kind of sense of launching out, and since he was the first one to do that,
mhm.
it was extra special. But then this year with Aubrey, here's a shot of them all throwing their mortarboard caps up, is one of those traditions, at the end.
Mhm.
And I love that because there's a certain excitement and it's so symbolic, okay, we've done this, shoo, and they're looking up as they're throwing. And it's kind of seems
Mm.
so aspirational to me, like the sense of delight and joy, but you're also looking upward for good things to come. And it's just a fun moment. So I was lucky enough to capture that one with all the caps in the air. And in the ceremony itself, there's that moment. I don't know if they do this. It doesn't sound like it's a practice necessarily in Japan, but in the US, when you move your tassel from one
Ah.
side to the
Mhm,
other,
mhm,
there's a
mhm.
certain point in the ceremony when that happens, which kind of visibly shows that I've completed my course of study and now I have the status of a graduate. I'm now an alumnus or an alumna, of the school that I attended, and I've made that shift. And it's and the throwing of the hat is another one of those visible pieces. So, and in the midst of all of that, we have our youngest Hannah. And th- towards the end of the year, they had a grandparents' day, and since none of our biological grandparents are living anymore, I stood in as a proxy and got to go. And so this is
Mhm.
her giving me a tour of her classroom and of her desk area and showing me one of her drawings from school. And so, in the midst of, like I said before, the two older kids launching out and enjoying that feeling, we have Hannah still on the journey, still, building towards that. So yeah, those are my shots from the end of the year that I wanted to share with you. Thanks for asking. Yeah.
Hmm, nice. Wow.
Are there any other questions or thoughts that you'd like to share before we close our episode?
No, I really enjoyed hearing you guys your stories of, it's nice to get the angle on both of those. And I mean, I'm always fascinated, Barney, by yours because it's Japan, and I don't know those things.
Mhm.
How old is Silas, your oldest son?
Yeah, he is 5, he'll be 6 in November, so he is now in his last year of kindergarten too.
Oh,
So
so he's the younger.
mhm, mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so then
Now
Yuma is in the 3rd grade in elementary,
okay, I
and
got him backwards.
yeah, and Silas will join him next year, and then we'll have his, graduation in March, and then I'm not sure if this is a tradition in the US, like, we have an kind of an entrance ceremony
No.
for before you start school where, the parents come and the faculty is there and you meet everyone and, you sit down and it's pretty big deal. So we had that for kindergarten and then we'll have it next April for Silas when starts 1st grade as well.
That's
But
so cool.
yeah, I thought this episode has been really a lot of fun, especially I'm hearing, Ken's point of view as such a longtime teacher and kind of the setting that Jacob and I were most familiar with, getting to hear like that kind of teachers, like someone who could have been our teacher, hearing how things were like, while we were sitting in the desks, from the other side of the blackboard, whatnot. But that was a lot of fun. I liked today's episode a lot.
Oh, for sure. Me too. I feel the same way. Thank you so much, Ken, for sharing that perspective. And I loved hearing about your excitement for your discipline. Like you were trying to find ways to motivate your students and get them engaged. And that's really inspiring to hear a teacher share that. And I think we all like aspire to do that in our careers in our own ways, but it was so neat to hear how you really embodied that. That's really cool. And I feel like you still do because like this upcoming Sunday, Ken is going to be leading a part of our church service that honors graduates. So you're still kind of like shepherding and encouraging students, in this phase of life too, with things that you do at church and in other places. So I think that's a gift that you have that you carry with you and give to many people. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's very easy to talk about your daughter, by the way.
Oh,
And
thank you.
part of it is just the way she is and what she stands for and all of those things. But the fact that we got to live near you too, and got to know you and Katie and the kids a little differently than some of the others. Yeah, look forward to it.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you. Yes. And we want to thank our listeners for joining us as we journey through this conversation. Thank you for taking time to consider the questions that we asked. And we hope that maybe in your own journey that you made some connections with what it was like to be a student or to graduate, or maybe if you're a parent to watch your own children going through that process now. And until next time, goodbye.